you their experiences of being a proud dad of a young person, a baby, a child with Down syndrome. As you may know, I'm the training manager for Down Syndrome UK. And if you haven't been to one of our webinars before, I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to what we do as a charity before I introduce you to these fabulous dads. So we've got Mark, who's dad to Ben, we've got Jin, who's dad to Grace, and we've got Jack, who's dad to Dottie. So they're all waiting in the wings to share with you their stories. So if you haven't been to one of our webinars before, Down Syndrome UK is a national charity. We're generally known in maternity by our healthcare initiative, Positive About Down Syndrome PADS. We work very closely with healthcare professionals. We've done a lot of research into how women generally were given the news that their baby had Down syndrome, did a lot of work into breastfeeding, and we've worked together with the Royal College of Midwives to produce a suite of e-learning modules. We're currently working on an e-learning module with All for Maternity. And both Nicola, our CEO, Nicola and I are part of the National Down Syndrome Policy Group to get the voices of people with Down syndrome heard through Parliament. So we support families, but we're really proud of the fact that we support professionals too, because there's gaps in both areas of support, to be honest. So our vision is very simple: a world where everyone with Down syndrome lives their best life. And what we do really well, I think, as you'll find out from today's webinar, is we champion the lived experience, which is often not heard, I think, through being a professional, healthcare professionals. You do your job, you say goodbye to the family, and you don't actually know what that experience was like for them. So we champion those lived experiences, but by sharing our lived experiences, we're hopefully letting our families know that they now belong to a very strong community. We use those lived experiences to educate professionals and to share them with policymakers and hopefully affect change. And as a sideline, we're enlightening the public with our lived experiences. So I think our charity is quite unique in the fact that I think personally, we cover all bases when it comes to bringing up a child with Down syndrome. So we're filling those gaps in supporting families. And we've got all the information in one place, but we also have a professional section of our website where you can tap into the resources that we're able to share with you. Just to show you that we're a credible organisation, we do a little survey every year. Actually, this should say 2024. This is our latest survey to show that parents do use us for support, and they see us as their go-to place. So what do parents worry about when they have a child with Down syndrome? I don't think I personally was unique in feeling all of these things, and the dads will share with you whether this is something that they felt as well. Common feelings are, what about the other children in the family? Are they going to be affected by being a sibling of someone with Down syndrome? Will we as a family be able to cope with any extra pressures that come with bringing up a child with disability? And another thing that I definitely felt when I had my son, who's now 15, is that he'll never fit in and he will live with us forever. And obviously a life of someone with Down syndrome in the 21st century isn't one that's tied to their families. Young people with Down syndrome are now living much more independent lives, getting jobs, hopefully paid jobs, although that's something that needs a lot of work. And they're living very ordinary lives, which is what they want to do. In terms of dad's experiences, often it's the mum that gets all the attention. It's the mum that's being cancelled, and it's the mum that's getting the support. But we did see that not just dads, actually grandparents is another thing that we've branched into, is making sure that the whole family feels supported. So we have a section on our website which is for expectant dads, because often we have one for expectant mums and the dads are being overlooked, but we also have a separate support group for dads. And we're really pleased with our book, The Nobody Told Me the Truth About Down Syndrome, which we do give out to new and expectant parents, which is, it's not just a collection of, stories. It's not sugar-coated stories, but it's not just, mums and dads, but it's also other family members, siblings, and people who work with Down syndrome. And we are really proud of how the feedback we've got back from this book, not just from parents, but professionals. But there is a whole load of stuff, dad's experiences in there. This is just the tip of the iceberg that I just took pictures of to show you. And we do hope that we're covering a whole range of experiences. So do signpost your families to this book if they haven't heard of it already. So I think now I'm just going to hand over to Jack, who's going to share his experience of being a dad to Dottie. So over to you, Jack.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping everyone can hear me. So yeah, my name's Jack. I am dad to Dottie. She just turned 3 on the 15th. So obviously been in this process now for 3 years, and there she is with her little brother Sam and my wife Emily. Sam is 7 months old, and like I said, Dottie's just turned 3, and Emily and myself are in our 30s. We'll keep it at that. Don't want to say not too much more on age. So I'm not entirely sure how the other dads found out, but we had a prenatal diagnosis. So we went through an amniocentesis. So we found out at 21 weeks that the baby wasn't, the long bones weren't growing, and they were a little bit concerned as to that. And then at 23 weeks, when we had another scan, the long bones had gone from just under the 3rd percentile to the bottom of the 1st percentile. So we were advised to get an amniocentesis. So we did. And following that, after about 4 or 5 days, we got the news that our child was going to have Down syndrome. The initial call was great. I just want to, before I carry on, say this is in no way me bashing anybody who was involved in our process, and it is just a lived experience. I've got a sister who's a midwife, I've got a sister-in-law who's a midwife, and another sister-in-law who is a NICU nurse. So we had somebody for all the different stages in our lives to tell us what to expect and what to question. But the initial phone call we had was brilliant. Looking back, it was really clear, really concise, dead informative. They'd already booked us a meeting for the following day at the Royal Derby Fetal Medicine Unit. And when we got there, the midwives were always brilliant with us. They were always like, they felt like they couldn't do enough when we were there, but there were occasions where they overpromised and underachieved. So a prime example that we had was we were promised that there was a family who was associated with the unit, with the fetal medicine unit, whose child had Down syndrome, and they were willing to come and visit us whenever. And they kept saying, "Oh yeah, we'll get that sorted," and it never got sorted because Dottie was born so early. She was at 31 and 6. She was born. Then there probably was a chance that it might have happened, but we could have done with it almost immediately, because when you get the news of that your child is going to be born with a difference, it was a bit crushing, to be honest. I think the closest we could have referred to it was grief. And we didn't know where to turn, what to do. We made the terrible mistake, as people do, of immediately going online and looking at Google, trying to gather as much information, because short of one family friend's cousin who was born with Down syndrome and was in his 20s, we didn't know anybody with Down syndrome. We'd never come across it. I mean, I've been teaching for 10 years in secondary school. I've never come across another child with Down syndrome. My wife has been teaching for the best part of a decade as well, and she's a primary school teacher. So again, no children with Down syndrome have come through her classes. So we didn't have a lot of lived experience. We were offered to see if we could find any material, but there was no material on the ward itself, which we thought was interesting. But so eventually a nurse just printed something off that she found in her own time and gave it to us the next time we turned up. And the most upsetting part for us was the continual request of termination. So we got asked 7 times by 7 different midwives on 7 different visits if we wanted to terminate, and I wasn't at all of those meetings. My wife had to go to some of them on her own because of work. So yeah, it was a bit upsetting. So eventually it did get to a point where we had to ask for the forms to like for the actual folder that we had to be brought out, and then we watched them write "Do not ask about terminations" on the front of the form, so that it was there for anyone who picked it up, because they clearly just hadn't been passing on the message. When we were in the hospital, like I said, she was born at 31 and 6. She was very, very premature. She spent 3 weeks in Derby NICU and 3 weeks at neonatal in Burton. It was look, don't get me wrong, everyone was brilliant. They were really, really caring. We were lucky that the midwife that we had on the ward was, we actually went to school with her. We didn't know that she was working there, but she was at school. So she took it upon herself to be our midwife, if you'd like, for the entire 3 days we were in the hospital. But there was a few things that Emily struggled with. The first one being that she was put on the ward. There's four women there were four women in her room, three of whom had babies. One of them was Emily, and she didn't. So on her first night, Dottie was born about 8 p.m. Emily went to bed at about 3 a.m. and she kept being woken up by crying children that weren't her own, and she kept looking over to an empty bed because she had the cot next to her where Dottie should have been, which was a bit upsetting, obviously, for her, and a bit frustrating looking back that the ward does have private side rooms, and she wasn't offered one until I asked for her to be moved after about 24 hours because she was just in bits. And she was the NICU unit at Derby is on the bottom, is on the ground floor. The hospital, the ward for mothers is on the third floor. So the only way that Emily could get down to see Dottie was if a midwife escorted her down the lift system. She wasn't allowed to go on her own. And that tore me as well because I wanted to be with Dot because obviously she was so small and tiny, and there was inevitably a chance that she wouldn't survive, and I wanted to be there for as long as I could. But then I also wanted to be with my wife, who was 2 floors away, and I was running up and down the stairs. I've never been so fit as when I was in that hospital running up and down, despite being on about 5 minutes sleep. Throughout the whole process, Emily was really well looked after by everyone, but yeah, not it's never about me as the dad in that situation. It should always be about the mum. But it would have been nice if at any point anybody asked me if I was all right. And that starts when we had the diagnosis as well. That was never part of the conversation. It was always about Emily, which is right. But even just something small, just to say you're okay, or a signpost or something, just to help me out would have been great. Growing up, Emily got quite a lot of support. She had counselling and visits from people and forums and groups and stuff that she was added to, and all this kind of stuff. But I think it was probably quite fairly common that as dad, I got nothing. I wasn't told where to go, where to look for. Nobody comes to check-ins. Nobody asked me how I was, even on the check-ins when they were coming in. And no one's ever asked me about my well-being if it wasn't for me seeking out private counselling. I don't think I ever would have sorted it out myself, just to have a chat about it all with somebody. And if it wasn't for charity like PADS, which does has quite a good community, I wouldn't have found the WhatsApp group with the 400 other dads that are on there that ranges from everything with a bit of banter about football all the way up to how do you deal with a situation with your kid growing up. So yeah, there isn't anything really at the moment that supported me as a dad, short of stuff that I might have researched myself. And it is a bit of a shame that we can't have that signposted for us as well, even if it means you don't actually walk us down the road, which is a little bit with Emily. She was taken to a lot of her things, or they came to her, but there's something could have just been, as a dad, you should go and look at this or this, and it might just help us out a little bit more. So in summary, yeah, my world came crumbling down when we found out the news, and I didn't have a lot of support afterwards. And Emily had a lot of support, and I'm not jealous of the fact, and Emily did very much deserve that support. And I'm glad that she still gets it. But yeah, very much in mourning, very much in grief for a baby that never existed, and you have that panic about a future that you're not entirely sure what to do because you had it all planned out and you're imagining walking my daughter down the aisle and then thinking that might never happen or something like that. And obviously, like, as we get older, or as we get wiser, shall we say, you realise that is still a possibility. But at the time, you just need pulling out of your spiral, which is kind of what the midwives at the fetal medicine were trying to do for Emily, but maybe not for myself. We just need a lot of positivity at that point, saying it'll be fine, and not hearing anything that might be too ruthless or brutal or unsympathetic or lacking empathy. Most people that I've spoken to are incredibly empathetic, and they really do make a point of trying to listen. But unless I started the conversation, nobody was going to try and help me with it. So that was my only real criticism of the whole system. And that's it for me.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Jack. That was really useful. I've written down a few questions. I'm going to save them for the end. But that was really insightful. I think when you say you're mourning the loss of a baby, I think that's quite a common thing. Although your baby is still there, obviously, um, I think if you don't know anyone with Down syndrome or you don't love anyone with Down syndrome, you just don't know, you don't see the future. And obviously we know now as parents of young people with Down syndrome, we know that the future's fine. It's more that things have changed. Parenting a baby with Down syndrome is different from parenting a baby without Down syndrome, I would say. And there's all of those appointments and all of that support that you need to know about. So it's just a different path, isn't it? It's not the path that you expected, and that's where the feeling of loss comes in, I think. So
Yeah,
thanks ever so much for sharing that.
having
Yeah,
had a second child, Sam, who doesn't have Down syndrome, the difference between the two is night and day. The processes
yeah,
that we've gone through,
yeah,
to the point where we almost feel bad for Sam that he doesn't get as much help or support as Dot does, but he doesn't need it, so it makes sense in that regard.
yeah. And it's your understanding of disability, isn't it? The fact that it's not less, is just different, and having a child with Down syndrome is just a different path. So thank you very much for that. And if you're able to hang on, that would be great. So I'm going to now hand over to Jin. Sorry, Jack, about moving your slides along if didn't do it very efficiently, but we don't have that with Jin. He's going to just tell us his story. So over to you, Jin.
Thanks, Lou. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Apologies, I'm in my car. As you might be able to tell from my top, I'm in the middle of a golf day, so I haven't had time to put any slides together. But hopefully I can tell you a little bit about my journey as well. Some really interesting to hear Jack's as well, because there's some similarities but some differences, which I'll talk to you a little bit about. So firstly, as you can see from the slide, our little girl is called Grace. She turned 2 on September the 1st. They say you blink and you miss it, and they're not lying. I don't know how suddenly she's 2 years old. My wife's called Esther, and Grace is our only child, and I think it's going to remain that way. I think one is plenty. Quite happy with just the one. So I guess it's good to begin with a little bit about the background of Esther and I struggled to conceive. We were trying for a couple of years, and we actually had decided we were going to go down the route of IVF. And lo and behold, one day before our initial consultation for IVF, we found out that Esther was pregnant, which was amazing news. Felt like, one of those miracle stories. Apparently it's quite common that this can happen because obviously the pressure's off, etc. So yeah, we were delighted to find out that Esther was pregnant. And my wife's, she doesn't usually let me say this, but she's not here. So she's a bit older than me. She was 43 when she was pregnant with Grace. And when we had, and she's previously had an ectopic a few years ago, back in COVID, which was obviously a horrible time. So our whole journey around pregnancy hadn't been a great one, with struggling to conceive, her having an ectopic, etc. during the pandemic. So we did a lot of scans, early scans, just because we were anxious about how this was going to go, and everything was seeming to be going well. From the 7-week scan, and then I think we had a 10-week scan. Basically, at every opportunity that my wife could get a scan, we got a scan. When it came to the 12-week scan, we were offered a test. I don't remember the name of this test, apologies, but I think it's to test for various things. I'm sure you guys know better than me. And we said yes to that. And we were called within a few days of this first test at 12 weeks. And we were told that there is a high risk of Grace, or at this point, baby, having Down syndrome. This high risk was 5%. So as a gambling man, I was like, 5%, kind of, 1 in 20. Didn't really think much of it. Esther was a little bit worried, but we didn't really think much of it. But we were offered the NIPT, which we said yes to. So we then had the NIPT test, and at that point, we got a call within a few days, and I remember it like it was yesterday. The lady on the phone, I think she's from fetal medicine. We're in Worcestershire, by the way. said, "I'm really sorry to inform you, but your baby has a 99% chance of having Down syndrome." Sorry, it didn't say chance, it said risk. Always the word risk. So as Jack kind of mentioned, our kind of world came sort of crumbling down around us. We were grieving. We didn't really know what to do or think, but termination was put on the table like pretty much straight away. Which kind of made us feel like that was the normal thing to do. So we were told to, take some time and to think about what we wanted to do, whether to terminate or not. The amnio was mentioned to us. Interestingly, though, we were told that to get amnio, to do the amniocentesis, you can only do that if you're going to terminate. Which, having spoken to a few people since this all happened, doesn't necessarily seem the norm. So I don't know what's happened there, but we're basically told that we can have amnio to know for sure, but we only if we're going to terminate. So anyway, we were kind of left to it. We didn't know anything similar to, like Jack said. We didn't really know much about Down syndrome. It was the way the news was delivered. I guess subconsciously we just felt like this must be bad news. They're saying risk, they're offering termination, so this must be bad news. So we took some time to decide what we were going to do. I'd love to say it was, it made no difference to us, but unfortunately the truth is that it made a big difference to whether we were going to proceed or not. We did decide in the end to go for amnio, not because we were going to terminate, but because my wife wanted to know for sure. I mean, if you ask me, 99% is, it's pretty high, but my wife, understandably, she wanted to be sure. And we always knew that no one can make us do anything. If we do the amnio, we can still decide to keep the baby. So the first attempt for the amnio, it wasn't possible. I'd love to tell you why. I can't remember the exact reasons, but there's something to do with the position of the baby or the placenta, which made it not possible. So we had to go back again. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go back the second time, I think a few days later, but my mother-in-law went with my wife. And again, because of, I think, the positioning of the baby or the placenta, my wife was told quite flippantly that there's a higher risk of miscarriage, because I think amnio always carries a slight risk of miscarriage, but there's a higher risk. And she was kind of told this at the point where the injection was about to go in. So my wife was obviously shocked that she'd just been told that there's a high risk of miscarriage, and she stopped the nurse from doing it. She called me, and we decided that we're not going to do the amnio. Pretty much at that point that we decided that we wanted to keep this baby, but that's kind of a different story. So that whole experience was, as you can imagine, wasn't great. I want to caveat in the same way that Jack did, but I've forgotten. But hopefully, I'm not here to bash anyone. But this is just the experience that we faced. So at that point, so when we were told that Grace had a 99% chance of having Down syndrome, we weren't really offered much support. We were told about art. That was about it. Every appointment we went to, I was pretty much, it was as if I wasn't there. And I appreciate, the mum is the most important, but I was barely acknowledged, which didn't feel great. I had to do my bit for Esther to conceive, so it would have been nice to maybe been acknowledged sometimes, but it was almost as if I wasn't there. But through my own research, I went online, and I've stumbled across pads, and I reached out, and I was put in touch with another dad called Scott, who was amazing. And that was the kind of, I might have got the timings wrong a little bit here, to be honest. This might have happened a bit before the amnio scenario, but that point of speaking to Scott and reaching out to pads was the game changer. We were sent a welcome pack, got to read all these incredible stories. Scott was amazing, got to speak to him over the phone. And with no judgment, I was really able to be really honest with him about how we were feeling. And he didn't make us feel bad or guilty, just made us realize that this is quite normal, but just told us his experience of having a girl with Down syndrome, and reading the welcome pack with all the other positive stories just made us realize that it's not the bad news that it was portrayed to be. And on every phone call and every meeting we went to, every appointment we went to in person, it always felt like it was doom and gloom. But we realized through pads that that's not necessarily the case. And if I'm honest, if it wasn't for pads, I don't think Grace would be here today, which breaks my heart. If you see those photos, to think that Grace may not be here today if we went a different way is really hard to acknowledge, hard to admit, but that is the truth. So I'm really, as you can imagine, very, very grateful to pads, hence me being no hesitation to give up an hour during a golf day to join this webinar and do anything for them. I even got to the point, I've just written this down because I think I always mention this, but through the experience I had with pads and the conversations I had and the welcome pack and the stories and speaking to Nicola, the founder of pads, I got to a point where I used to say to my wife, kind of tongue in cheek, but I think I meant it, that I got to a point where I'd be disappointed if our baby didn't have Down syndrome. I was so geared towards her having Down syndrome and so ready for it and so excited about all the things that I'd heard that, I almost would have been disappointed. We've been very lucky, I must say, in terms of Grace hasn't had, touch wood, any additional health issues, which I know, not every pad's dad or mum is able to say. So, we're very blessed that she, touch wood, so far hasn't had any additional complications. So going on to the birth, we had a planned C-section at Worcester Royal, and from then on, everything was amazing. I can't fault the staff. Our midwife Leah was incredible. I remember her coming to greet us, or not greet us, but she greeted us, got us settled in our ward as we were waiting for our slot for a C-section. It was a really bizarre experience, like almost like a dinner reservation, but to have a baby. And I remember Leah coming and opening the curtains and saying, "Are you ready to have a baby?" Which is really surreal to be asked that question, but she was incredible. We couldn't connect to the Wi-Fi for some reason, and it turns out we created a playlist of Christian music, because me and my wife are both Christian, that we wanted to have in the theatre. It turns out Leah, by the grace of God, however you want to put it, she's Christian as well. So she connected her phone, and it turns out her playlist had very similar songs to the ones on our playlist, which was, again, amazing. Everyone in the theatre was great. We, fortunately, interesting to hear Jack's story, because we were offered a private room. So I feel very lucky that we were offered a private side room, which made a big difference to have that privacy. We were in for about 5 days. This isn't the hospital's fault, but it happened to be September 2023 when we had a heat wave, so there was no AC in that room, so it's absolutely baking. We ended up going home actually because it was too hot in the end, but can't blame anyone for that. But we appreciated being given that bit of extra privacy for visitors, etc. So I'm just going to finish with a couple things which I think could have been done better. I think positive language being used, so maybe using the word chance instead of risk. I think as soon as the word risk was mentioned, it's you associate that with bad news. And just being signposted to pads. I'm really grateful I found pads, but I know other parents with kids with Down syndrome who hadn't heard of pads. So it's great that now I can signpost them to pads, but it'd be great if at that point, when we were first told of the high chance of Grace having Down syndrome, that we were told about pads there and then. I think that would have made a big difference to our journey, and a more positive one. So yeah, hopefully I haven't been too negative, but thank you for listening.
Thanks, Jin. That's really kind of you to share your experiences. It's very true. The importance of language is so important, and if you haven't done any training, pads do our lived experience training that I deliver, which is CPD accredited, which covers the importance of language. So that's just, sharing the lived experience. Jen, you've really put that into perspective. So I'm going to thank you very much, and I'm now going to just move on to Mark, who's going to share his experience, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. So over to you, Mark.
Perfect, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, good.
Right, well, I'll start. So yes, so to introduce myself, I'm Mark. I'm the proud father of Benjamin, who's turning 6 in a couple of months' time. So I'm a little bit further ahead in the journey than sort of Jack and Jin, and I'll talk a little bit more kind of the end of nursery and sort of starting school side of things. But to start with Ben, so Ben was our first child. We had the sort of prenatal general screening that pretty much everyone gets, and I think as it's mostly based on age, and my wife and I were in our 30s, sort of lower 30s at this point, so everything came back low risk, and we didn't really think too much of it. I remember probably when those results came, to be honest, being a bit relieved and just thinking, I'm kind of glad, because I don't think I could be a dad to a child with a disability, or a dad to be anything different. And I don't know, it's honest. I'm not particularly proud of having thought that, but it is honestly what I thought at the time. As I was just glad that everything seemed fine. But we had some issues with Ben's growth towards sort of second trimester, third trimester. His growth was particularly slow, and it sort of plateaued. My wife was having scans every couple of weeks, and there wasn't a diagnosis mentioned at this point, but there was a potential issue with the placenta and the blood flow, maybe, but just a lot of monitoring, and then eventually a discussion of an emergency C-section. So, and then following one scan, we had in our minds that he was going to be delivered maybe a week early, so sort of maybe week 38, 39, and actually in week 35 that our obstetrician basically said your baby has to be delivered tomorrow, and we were completely unprepared for this. To have to come in the next morning for sort of steroid injections and an emergency section. But so Ben was born sort of just before 36 weeks, which put us a month earlier than everyone else in our NCT group, which certainly didn't help. And he was, even that without the diagnosis at the time, was really difficult, because he was born early, he was very premature, he was very small, and we didn't even get to hold him in the theatre. He was whisked away from us and taken with the paediatricians and the obstetricians and goodness knows who else, and whisked off to NICU immediately. So we sort of had this wonderful thing, here was our first baby, and oh look, there it's he's gone again after a couple of minutes. And I think it was 3 or 4 hours in the end before we were allowed our first visit to just to hold him in this sort of incubator with wires and everything. And we sort of, the first couple of days, we just kept visiting him when we can. Like Jack mentioned, our postnatal ward was 2 floors up from the NICU, and as he said, all the other mums there had babies, and we were basically having to visit ours. It was almost like he was in prison, because we had to get permission. We had to ring the NICU in advance, go down 2 flights of stairs, and get permission to get him out of an incubator and to hold on to him. And in terms of our eventual diagnosis, the doctors mentioned a couple of days in that there were some features they were a bit unsure about, and they just wanted to run some tests and didn't tell us what that actually meant, but just said, oh, we want to run some extra tests. And we sort of left it at that and didn't really think about it. And then a couple of days later, we were taken into a side room, and the consultant and a couple of nurses came in to deliver the diagnosis. They used the medical term of trisomy 21. They didn't say Down syndrome specifically, and I still remember that diagnosis like it was yesterday. And my wife and I just, we just collapsed in grief. And I remember the consultant saying, look how sad the mum is. Not in those words, but a couple of nurses went to make a cup of tea to give her some tissues, and I was just left in the corner of the room to cry it out, which wasn't great. And I remember that I would go and see Ben on the NICU, and it was a week. I think it was a week of crying at his bedside until our nurse came over and asked, "How are you doing, Dad? Can I get you anything?" And in terms of the information we were given, we were a little bit fortunate that we have a very active local Down syndrome group. So our consultant there did have some experience. She ran an outpatient clinic for children with Down syndrome. So, kind of gave us leaflets and things and said, when Ben goes home, get in touch with them and see what happens. We did get given the Nobody Told Me book, which was very helpful at the time, but not a lot of support from the healthcare professionals. And I remember that the most useful words I actually had on the unit before we took Ben home 3 weeks after he was born was from my mum, who's a retired pediatrician. And it was an honest conversation, but it was, this isn't an easy time, but he is still going to be your son and you'll love him just as much as anyone else would love their child. And even if your journey is different, you'll still be just as proud of his achievements as anyone else was, even if they're a little bit later than typical children. And those words still live in me later. And I, like most mums, she was right in the end. But we, 3 weeks later, we took Ben home and started. And this was just in the start of lockdown. So, this was when my wife was sort of stuck at home and on maternity leave and not really able to visit anyone. We didn't have a lot of friends and family locally because we'd only just moved to the area. And what were we, things that were really big to us, our big worries at the time was, well, firstly, what was our life going to be like now? This was not something we'd prepared for or planned for. Could we have other children? And would they be a burden to Ben, or would he be a burden similarly to them? What would the people around us think? Like I think Jack said, we didn't know anyone with Down syndrome. We knew of the condition. We'd probably seen people out and about with it, but didn't know anyone closely. So this was our very first experience. And I remember the first few outings when I would take Ben out and it just being almost paralyzed by constantly overthinking of, was anyone around me looking at me and looking at my son and what were they thinking and what were they saying to their friends? And it took me a long time to just get over that and think, I'm just going to go out and be a dad and enjoy my time with my son. And anyone who gets to know us will actually see what that experience is like and kind of stop worrying about what people think if they're not people you're close to. But we worried about what this would mean for our jobs. We both worked full time at this point, and was one of us going to have to give up our jobs? Were we going to have to change our jobs? Very, very big question mark. And lastly, what was independent living going to be like? Was Ben ever going to be able to move out? Was he always going to be with us? Sorry, that's my watch. Yeah, just the future, and everything was a very big question mark for us. Next slide. So, in terms of healthcare professionals, these are all the various different professionals that see Ben, some of them more frequently than others, and some sort of dip in and out. We'll come and see, if something flares up, they'll come and provide support for a couple of appointments and then we'll dip out. Whereas the most regular ones is kind of his pediatrician. He's under regular endocrine and respiratory. He has his eyes and hearing checked very often. We've been fortunate, mostly they've been positive interactions. The only very specific negative one we had was actually a sonographer when we had our second pregnancy. And I think she remembered my wife from her first one and just sort of asked about the first child. And we mentioned she had Down syndrome, and it was, oh, that's dreadful news. And I'm so sorry to hear that. And, we tried to brush it off as best you can, really, because it wasn't actually, we'd come out of the first part of the journey and that wasn't really how we felt. He was our son and we were enjoying our life as parents with him, and we didn't really appreciate that kind of language. But a big thing that's been really helpful for us in our consultations with parents is first treating the patient just as a child, asking, trying not to ask just about the medical side of things, but also asking what's going well with them, what are they enjoying, they're making friends, are they getting on at nursery, things like that. And really not using the words can't or won't with anything the child will do, because none of that's known when the child is young. And it's more helpful just to be honest and say, might have difficulties with this or may do this slightly later than other children, but not putting that ceiling, that limit on this child, because I think if you put limits on children, that you just can't hope for them to overcome that. And it's you putting that limit on them rather than them even trying in the first place. Next slide, please. So this is our, I've not had huge loads of dealings with pads with Down Syndrome UK just because we were fortunate to have a very good local charity who are based in Andover. They're just about 10-15 minutes away from us, and as I said earlier, our pediatrician sort of recommended them to us very early on. So we took Ben for sort of meet and greet visits a few weeks after he'd been sent home, and they've been a constant source of support in his life. So it's really important, I think, to highlight these support groups for parents, and they've been sort of preparing him for school since he was really young with sort of educational visits, social activities for the children and for us as the parents, so that we get to meet other parents who are on a similar journey to us. Because it's hard to say, but I think one thing my wife and I always come back to is that no one else really understands our journey other than other parents of children like ours, because they just I think it's just too far gone from the typical experience for many for them to really be able to understand how it is. But Raising 21 have been a tremendous support for us and continue to do so. So we're very proud to live so locally to them. Next slide. So Ben started mainstream school just over a year ago. And it was a really a challenging time for us because we just didn't know what was going to happen. He'd been at nursery since he was about a year and hadn't really thrived there. I think the nursery were not very well staffed. There was constant change, and they couldn't really put anything above the bare minimum into helping Ben to settle. So he never really made friends, and his nursery graduation was quite challenging because of that. But his school that he went to, they have another child with Down syndrome who's in the year above him, which was really actually a great thing for me to see when I did my opening visits and I saw another child there who was, thriving and enjoying his time there and taking part in the class activities. So I think as soon as I saw that, I knew that our local school was the one to send Ben to. We obviously had the battle with the local council. I think every parent has in terms of getting an EHTP and getting enough support in there, and basically just trying to get the funding that he needed. But we managed to get that in. The Senko there was really experienced and had a lot, was really positive and very inclusive and really sort of almost excited to meet Ben and see what would happen. And the school itself has really shown us what can happen if with just an inclusive environment. He's really fitted in well. He takes part in all his class activities. His learning journey is different, and we can't set the same targets of him as the other children, but he is thriving, and that's the most important thing for us from him being at school, is that he is learning, he is making friends, and he's enjoying himself there. So we couldn't ask much more from them. But in terms of thinking more critically, what has been the most difficult part of the journey and where do parents like us need the most support? It's definitely the early weeks and months after the diagnosis, where all you've got is a diagnosis and very little idea of what your child is actually going to be like in a few years' time. Then we were fortunate he's not had too much in terms of surgery and other healthcare conditions, but he was a very, very late walker and still struggles with, even the age of nearly 6, really does struggle with walking and physical activities. His general health, his health is fragile at the best of times, to be honest. Most people's children seem to sort of bounce back from anything, but very small illnesses can really derail him and take him out of school for a while, stop him doing activities, and it takes him a while to get back to where he is. We've really struggled with the speed of his learning. Obviously, he has a learning difficulty, so he has learnt. He always learns what we try and teach him, but it's how long it takes to do that and how many times we have to constantly go over the same thing over and over again to get him to do it. But it does make it all the more proud when he does and when he succeeds. And even though he's not achieving as much as his siblings maybe in some regards, we're just as proud of what he does learn, and we know that he's always trying his very best. And the last thing is communication, I think, in terms of it's just so critical for our children, and sometimes there's things that we struggle with Ben, and it's not actually because of his condition, but it's just because he can't communicate what he wants or what he likes or doesn't like. And when you just realize that, it changes your perspective on it. So it's really it's a really good thing to keep in mind. Actually, it's, behavior can so often be linked to just communication, and it's just taking that little bit of time to try and find out what's going on. I remember it really vividly the other day with him that I'd taken him downstairs. I'd got him ready for breakfast, and I'd put his little sister down with him. And then I'd come downstairs, and he'd basically taken a box of cereal out the cupboard and just tipped the whole thing on the floor in front of her. And I was so cross at him because I was like, he knew he shouldn't have done that. And then I realized all he was trying to do was feed her because she was probably crying and saying that she was hungry, but he couldn't explain that to me. And so I just had to take that moment back and be like, it's okay. He was trying to do the right thing. I just didn't realize it at the time. But what does the future hold for us as Ben's parents? Well, he's thriving in school. We hope to be able to send him to a mainstream secondary if all goes well. Obviously, that's still quite a few years away. We want to really try and push the life skill side of things and get him as independently living as possible and even working. We're fortunate. I do know some adults now in sort of shops that I go to with Down syndrome who are working and really enjoying being able to contribute in that way. Whether he may be able to have adult relationships and get married. Although, to be honest, his mum has basically said no one's ever going to be good enough for him, and he's not getting married. But I'll try my best to make sure he finds a girlfriend along the way, even if she doesn't know about it. But yeah, we're excited for the future with him, much more so than we were in the early days. But to link back to our original concerns as a family, now that we have him and he is the way he is, we wouldn't change anything, and that's a genuine feeling. Obviously, it wasn't what we wanted at the start, but I wouldn't change it now for anything. We have now got two other children, so we've got a 4-year-old and an 18-month-old who keep us very, very busy. We generally had really good positive interactions from people who know Ben and the family and his school and places like that. We've been fortunate that we've both been able to continue our jobs with sort of flexible hours and in the early years having maybe sort of doing condensed hours so that one of us can have a day off to look after Ben and do his appointments and things like that. And the only outstanding question really for us is what the independent living will be like. But we'll just have to wait and see on that front, I guess. So thank you very much for listening. And yeah, any questions for me and the other dads?
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. I'm going to rush through just the last few slides because we have gone over time a bit. But so thank you all for sharing your perspectives. I've really enjoyed it as well. And it's nice to know that there are common themes there in how you feel about being a parent of a child with Down syndrome, whether you're a mum or a dad. So for just to let you know that our next webinar is November 17th on cultural perspective, followed by one working with paediatricians.